Okay, welcome everyone to the Jetpack Compose with Material U panel at Android Dev Summit 2021. I'm your host for this session. My name is Adam. I'm a lead Android engineer at Cover and GDE for Android. We've got a live chat running, so if you haven't already asked a question on Twitter, please feel free to ask questions during the live panel, and we'll do our best to answer as many of those as we can. And we've got a great lineup today with a wealth of knowledge on Compose and Material U. So let's go ahead and introduce them. Connie, you want to start?
Hello, everyone. My name is Connie Shi. I am an Android developer on the Material Android team. Most recently, I worked on the Compose Material library modules. Over to Leland.
Hi, I'm Leland Richardson. I'm a software engineer working on Jetpack Compose. Over to Clara.
I'm Clara. I'm an engineering manager on the Compose team.
And hey, I'm Nick. I'm an Android developer relations engineer focusing on Jetpack Compose and material design.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. And let's launch into our first question. This is a question that I've seen coming up quite a lot regarding Material U. So how do we design for pre-Android 12 devices going forwards? Do we attempt to port the Material U design to older platforms, or do we downgrade to the older material theming to fit in better? What's the kind of best practice here?
I think I can probably take a shot at this. So here, you need to keep a few things in mind. So you'll need to migrate to a Material Design 3 theme to take advantage of dynamic color on Android 12 plus devices. So you need to keep that in mind. We then also recommend that you create a custom theme to be applied to your app when dynamic color isn't available. And we've actually made a new material theme builder tool to help you with this process. And we've also got a couple talks out at ADS, which should also give you lots of great info on this as well.
Cool. Yeah. So I caught up with the talk regarding sort of integrating the Material U into your branded colors earlier. It's got a ton of great information in it. I think that the tool that's been released as well that you mentioned is going to be super useful as well. So I definitely recommend everyone checks that stuff out. How easy is it to integrate Jetpack Compose into an existing application which uses Viewbinding?
I can take this, I guess. So the question is about Viewbinding specifically, which I guess there's a few ways to interpret this question. So if you wanted to use Viewbinding with Jetpack Compose, like on Jetpack Compose UI, that's not really something that you can do because Viewbinding is really made to sort of get rid of that find view by ID type call. Which Compose really doesn't have. It's sort of architected differently. But if you wanted to use the two side by side and sort of migrate slowly over to Compose, while some of your UI is still using XML layouts and Viewbinding, then that all works fine. And definitely that sort of incremental migration path is something that's been really important for us from the start for people wanting to adopt Compose.
Yeah, it's clear that it's been a really big focus for the team. I think if anyone is using data binding over view binding still, which I'm sure a lot of people are, there is also Compose interop as well. I think we've used it once or twice at Cover, and that, like the rest of the interop, seems to work pretty seamlessly. So that's an option for people as well.
Yeah, I know that in the past we've had some issues here and there around getting the data binding annotation processor to work with the Compose compiler plugin, just because there's some compiler stuff going on there. But my current understanding is that all of those things have been solved. So if you are having any sort of issues kind of related to that, then definitely file a bug.
Cool. Yeah, there's quite a few moving parts there. So
yeah.
Great. There's a lot of cool support for making animations in Jetpack Compose. But does anyone have any recommendations for designers and developers to get aligned? So on this person asks, on the one hand, I don't want designers' creativity to be limited. On the other hand, I don't want to give designers false hope either. Has anyone got any kind of insights they can share on that aspect?
I can take a stab. We've we've resought animations with Compose. So Compose has a complete new set of animation APIs that are actually extremely powerful. So a lot of the things that were really hard to do before are actually quite easy to handle in Compose, which some we're still finishing how we. So the APIs we don't fully have there as stable are element transitions. That's something that we're still completely working on. It's not fully stable as far as I know. But otherwise, I have seen the community have done a lot of work trying to integrate Lottie with Compose, and I'm pretty sure that's working at the moment. So there are a lot of things that are possible, and I would challenge things that you thought were not possible with the view system may be possible now. So it's worth reopening that conversation. Does someone have more? Leland, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, definitely if there are sort of types of animations or something that you feel like aren't accomplishable with the current sort of set of APIs and primitives, then definitely like surface that with us. We're always interested to understand what kinds of things people want to do. And you know, our goal is to make APIs that are easy to use, but flexible enough to kind of encompass all of the use cases that people might dream up. You know, and as Clara mentions, there's kind of a lot of different things that you can do. You know, there is, you know, Lottie is supported now, which isn't something we did. You know, the Lottie team built support for Compose. And there's a lot of cool new animation APIs coming out that I'm probably not the best person to talk to, but the big one that we're still not quite there yet, and you know might be in you know next release or something like that, is the shared element transitions, which is something that we really needed to kind of think about the fundamentals about how to accomplish such a thing correctly. And it really needed us to kind of rethink some of the ways that the runtime actually works. And so we've been working on some sort of new fundamental kind of APIs in the runtime that enable things like shared element transitions in a really cool way that I'm pretty excited about.
Great. That sounds super interesting. Awesome. That's something to look forward to. So some live questions coming in. So what is the best way to debug recomposition? How often is it happening? Is it too often? Should it? And what's causing that kind of problem? Leland, I suspect this is one for you as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one we're thinking a lot about. It's definitely a tooling problem that we want to work on, and we have some things that we're doing that we aren't really ready to release yet. At the moment, you know, when you're looking at something recomposing, there's really kind of one main thing that causes something to recompose, which is you know, a state mutation that happened to a state object that got read during composition or during another phase of compose. And sometimes that can kind of happen without you realizing. And so that's where this sort of tooling becomes very important. And, you know, right now, like we sort of direct people to use the tools that, you know, are and have been available to them, like, you know, just the normal Kotlin debugger, and, you know, even sometimes using like printline and you know, the Android logging system can be helpful. And so that's kind of my best recommendation at the moment, but with just sort of the sort of future looking thing that you know, promises this is something that we're definitely thinking a lot about, and we'll hopefully have some new tooling to make this easier for people.
Awesome. Do you think that this is something that people are maybe thinking a little bit too much about? I think we've had a lot of discussions within our team about recomposition and, you know, does this trigger it and does it not? Are people kind of overthinking this a little bit too much? Is a lot of this not something you have to worry about?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that if you have a performance issue and something is recomposing more than you expected, then, you know, very clearly that's something that you should care about. I've talked about this before, where there's kind of this interesting thing, which is something I'm not super happy about, which is that Compose can feel somewhat magical sometimes, and we don't really want it to feel magical or surprising. We just want it to feel intuitive and just sort of work. And sometimes there's like a really good simple mental model to understand, okay, you know, like what I kind of use as a guiding mental model is wherever I have a state read, if I just kind of travel up the code, the nearest composable function is going to be the thing that recomposes. In reality, that's not always the case, because there are a lot of different sort of micro optimizations that the compiler might be executing. And it really may end up being somewhat surprising what sort of more narrow or more broad scope ends up recomposing just as an optimization. But in general, you should be writing code where if you follow that earlier mental model, it should sort of work that way. Like the code's behavior should be the same. And that's sort of the point, is that mental model then ends up being a good sort of guide in terms of the behavior. But there are some times where if you really understand how the system works, then you can write things that are slightly more performant. I would just sort of guide people to sort of only worry about that once you know that performance is a problem in that particular situation.
I'd also add, I feel like the code that Leland writes is always going to do the right amount of recomposition, but most developers out there are not someone from the team. And it's part of the learning process, right? Like to me, if we can figure out how to properly tool composition debugging, it is a step towards what we've been trying to achieve with Compose, which is that it's easy to learn and it's really easy to ramp up, but it's always going to be part of that learning curve. I don't think anyone's ever going to write perfect code from scratch. And so it is a tool that we're aware is missing there to really help people learn.
Great.
Well,
Okay.
there's sort of this overarching principle that we've had from the get-go, which is that we want the sort of natural code that you write to be the best code. And we obviously can't do that all the time, but we don't want people to be bending over backwards to write something that is just slightly more performant. And if there's something that you think is a common pattern that is nice code but performs poorly, then maybe open up a bug or something to kind of identify this as a pattern that we might want to think more about or optimize.
Great. Awesome answers. Thank you. Thank you both. This person asks, we rely on motion layouts quite a lot, and I was wondering whether this would be available in Jetpack Compose or how one can migrate their motion layout.
I can take a stab at this. Motion layout is interesting because we kind of developed motion layout and Compose in parallel, and we reached a point where both products were kind of going in parallel tracks. We are looking at motion layout and Compose. The key is animations are really good in Compose out of the box, so I would really encourage people to try and build things. When you're starting from Compose, and Compose is the thing that you're trying to write, try to write Compose code with Compose animations. But you saw already we added support for constraint layout because it is something that developers asked us. Like you're used to constraint layout, you want to be able to have those capabilities. We add that, and similarly, we're looking at motion layout. But I don't think it's a giant gap that we're trying to fill with motion layout because animations are really powerful.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, it has parallels to constraint layout, where I think I think constraint layout and motion layout both kind of filled gaps that were in the view system, but Compose doesn't necessarily have these kinds of limitations. So for us personally, we don't reach for constraint layout very often in Compose. There are obviously use cases for it, but very similar, I think. Cool. So how do branding colors work with Material U? We have specific colors for our brand. Do these get overrun by Material U?
I could start answering this question, and I'm sure Nick has some inputs as well. So definitely understand your concern. We want to allow personalization based on a user's wallpaper colors, but also we want to be respectful and support developers who have very strong brand colors or other colors that they'd like to protect. So with respect to your particular question, no, they do not get overwritten by Material U. So when you use material theming from the Material 3 library, you can choose to use dynamic color, which is sort of a signature piece of Material U. If your user's device is on Android 12 and with the, I guess, color slots on in our color scheme that you would like to map to your brand colors, you can explicitly specify those, and those will not be overridden by Material U. So basically, we encourage you to adopt Material 3 so that you can then try out, and whatever is comfortable for your brand and your product, you could, opt in at the pace of your choosing. So, yeah. Nick, do you have any other advice?
Yeah, I'll add to this. So I think it ties into the question earlier in that in most cases you do need a fallback color scheme because dynamic color is actually only available on Android 12 and above. So it's a good idea to actually get going with a branded color scheme from the start as a fallback for that, but also just if you want to use that primarily in your app. And again, this is where that material theme builder tool can come in really handy, just because the color scheme class in the Material 3 library models the Material 3 color scheme, and it actually has around 26 parameters that model all of the color slots, which is quite a lot and gives you a lot of flexibility in your design. But in terms of like mapping your brand colors to those, it can be quite potentially overwhelming or just quite a lot at first. So that theme builder tool actually allows you to put in key brand colors, which then harmonize those and expand those that feels like it fits in with Material U, but still feels like your brand as well, which I think is a pretty good approach to take here.
Yeah, and since the theme builder, is there's a Figma plugin, right? Your designer could do that and provide you. I think the experts compose and Android XML code, so you don't have to do it by yourself.
Cool. Yeah, and from what I understand with that tool, there's scope for sort of extra colors if you have like quite a big brand palette. So it looks pretty flexible on that front, from what I understand. Cool, great. Cool. So a more kind of slightly kind of architectural question. Should we have one scaffold per screen or one single scaffold outside of navigation? Pros and cons.
That's a good question, because it's something the team is discussing internally now. We bit scaffold as a way of helping you build that material app, right? And it helps you put the fab and the bottom nav and the top up bar in the right place. It helps us figure out things like interactions between those components. But especially as we started exploring large screens, we started to hit kind of the limits of it, because it was really hard to build certain things. We even saw in our JetNews samples, we ended up having to nest two scaffolds to achieve what we wanted, because some of these elements were per screen and some of these elements were for the entire app, and we ended up with this weird dichotomy. So the real honesty is we're starting to rethink how we approach that. Right now we only have one scaffold, and that's what's the public API. So you can follow the example, like for example, JetNews I know has two nested scaffolds, and that's how we solved it. It's not ideal and we're looking into this, but for now, sadly, it is the answer.
Interesting. Hadn't caught that. I'll have to have a look at that a bit later. Great. Can you talk about the new elevation updates in Material 3? And this is something that's changed substantially, I think.
I guess Connie and I can take this one as well. Yeah. Well, I'll let Connie handle the implementation in the Material 3 library. She's very familiar with that. But just in general, there's a sort of expanded way to look at elevation in Material 3, where there is both shadow elevation, which you may be used to from Material Design 2 and everything that came before Material 3, but to a lesser extent. Primarily now, elevation, or I would more like to think of it as a way to like separate different containers of content in your app, is done with this tonal variation of colors. So basically you would increase the elevation to increase the tone of that container, which sort of increases its prominence. And you'll see this around the Android 12 system UI and just generally speaking in Material U and Material 3 apps. But yeah, Connie, do you have any thoughts?
Sure. I agree with everything Nick said. Just to add that it is not an entirely new concept. We sort of expanded on something that we already did in the previous version of Material. You might be familiar with elevation overlays in dark theme. So we took them and expanded it. So now it's an effect that is applied in both light and dark theme, as well as in your dynamic light or dark themes. So we think that it creates an interesting visual effect, and it softens the it's an interesting visual effect and softens the transitions between interact elements. So you might notice a very prominent example is in our top-up bar, as you lift, the color fill changes, and we think that's kind of a delightful effect. Also, as Nick mentioned before, the contrast is for accessibility benefits, but we think it's kind of a delightful visual feedback for everyone. In terms of implementation, you'll be familiar that it is part of the Surface composable. There is 2 different options for you to configure: the tonal elevation and also the previously available shadow elevation. But definitely, if you would like to learn more, there is a section on the m3.material.io site under, I believe, color systems. So thanks for the question.
Great. So this is something that we were discussing at Joy-Con London today, actually. So are there any APIs available for screenshot testing in Jetpack Compose?
That's a good question. We actually have internal screenshot testing. I think the key here, we're working with the AndroidX test team. So there's an AndroidX test library, and we're working with them to figure out what we should do. The key is screenshot testing tends to be very tied to what your CI/CD is. And so it's really hard for us to right now put those APIs in and make them fully useful without having a full story there. So it's something that is in the works, but we're not ready to share in any way.
Cool. Okay. There are a few community options out there as well at the moment. I think there's a library called Snap, which has been doing Compose snapshot testing. I think it's built on top of a Facebook library. It's been around for a while. And I think the Cash App team, Paparazzi, supports snapshot testing. I don't believe they support Compose just yet, but I think it's on their roadmap as well. So there's a few options out there for people who want to investigate this kind of thing. It does seem to be something that is more popular now, presumably as people are migrating from one thing to the other. Lovely. So will there be something like Layout Manager in Compose in the near future?
I assume this is asking sort of in relation to lazy row and lazy column.
Presumably, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know for sure. I think... Yeah, Clara, go.
I can take this. We're currently, if you're following kind of tip of tree compose, we're currently in the works. We're trying to, so we built lazy column first, and we're now trying to extract the lazy bit of it so that we can build more layouts on top without having to rewrite a bunch of the performance optimizations that we've done inside. That's currently in the works. It did not make 1.1 as far as I know. So you can see it if you're in top of tree compose, or if you follow our alpha releases, you will start seeing some hints of these sort of things, but it's in the work. Yeah, not ready.
Nice. Very cool. So how can we support keyboard with Jetpack Compose for both focus and accessibility?
So we've actually done a ton of work in that. That is one of the biggest things that is landing in 1.1 beta, which was released yesterday. We have done a lot of work on keyboard, mouse, and focus. So you should find that already built into the system. You can find the new focus APIs as well. So I'm not sure what else specific details this person's looking for, but check out the new changes in 1.1.
Great.
Yeah, I think it might be safe to say that if there's issues now, then you should sort of consider them as bugs, and we'd appreciate any help. If you're trying 1.1 and you're finding something doesn't work for your use case, then we're definitely interested in hearing that.
Okay, so that kind of support should be pretty well fleshed out and pretty final at this stage, effectively. Lovely, awesome, cool. So we have this is a question that I've seen some people asking a few times. So we use Kotlin files like color.kt to define the theme in Jetpack Compose. Do we still need themes.xml? Is it going to go anywhere?
Again, good question. Themes.xml still has a place as long as we still have, for example, you're going to be defining manifest colors, right? You will want your status bus color. Compose can't take care of everything right now. Compose is hosted within an activity. And so there is still a space for that, and a minimum requirement, at least, of some of the elements that kind of set up the scrim of an Android app, which we haven't got around to being able to integrate into Compose. On top of that, most apps are doing interop right now. So they will have an existing app, it has a lot of views, and it's starting to have Compose. And we've built an adapter. There's a material theme adapter that helps you move your themes from XML and kind of import those at runtime into Compose and be able to pipe those colors through. But it's not something we can do the other way around because the theming system in Android is built at compile time. So we can't take runtime generated colors from Compose and actually pipe them into views. So as long as you still have views in your app, you are going to have XML colors and XML themes as the source of truth, just because you will otherwise not be able to use things that you define in Compose from views. If that makes sense.
Cool. So to avoid the kind of duplication issue in that case, then does it make sense for people to reference these XML colors and that kind of thing from Compose directly, or is that not something that you recommend?
I think as long as a color is used both from views and Compose, it makes sense to keep the source of truth in XML. And yes, reference those. We have APIs to reach out to all of the resources from Compose. So you can do color resource and pull that in. And I think as long as you have views, that is the recommended path.
Cool. Great. So along with the new Material 3 library and the new additional Android Studio tooling, what other best practices can you share to Android developers to help prepare their apps to use dynamic color with their brand's theme for Android 12?
Yeah, sure. Well, again, I'll say here that this is where that material theme build tool really shines. You can create custom color experiences. You can also visualize what a wallpaper would look like in the app as well. And yeah, I guess we've got a lot of resources as well that you can take a look at in terms of like when you should use a dynamic color scheme, when that's supported, when you should fall back to a branded one. But yeah, basically you can include your brand colors in that tool, and you can expand on that as we've spoken about already to increase the amount of colors in that palette. And yeah, again, we've got talks here, especially the material you're applying dynamic color in your brand one at ADS that I'd strongly recommend checking out.
Can I also add, we just released the first alpha of the library yesterday, so we're super open to feedback. If you start trying to implement all of these things in your app, please do file feedback on the team because we would be really interested to see how it's working for you.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great thing to call out there. So what material use styled components are currently available?
That's a great question. I'll start by saying that we introduced new updated baseline light and dark color schemes, as well as typography. Of that, we've updated a bunch of new components. Some highlights are, as I mentioned before, top bar, which shows off that nice tonal surface elevation. But for a full list, you can check out, once again, m3.material.io. We think that it has a good coverage of the most common and also common components and shows off the changes that were introduced in Material Design 3. But yeah, like Clara was saying, we're still in early days, actively developing and adding more updates with each release. So happy to hear feedback and make adjustments.
Awesome, great. Cool, and this half hour has gone by very quickly, so we're on our last question now. So is there anything that I should be aware of before trying to use Jetpack Compose to make an Android TV app?
It's a good question. Leland, I feel like this is in your territory. So let me start. We haven't actually worked on, we've been very focused on Compose for the phone for our 1.0. Now we're looking at large screens, and that's been the focus kind of 1.1 and probably will be for the next release as well. And we haven't really tackled TV yet. You've seen where Compose is out as well. So we've been looking at some performance issues when you run Compose on a very small screen, because Where has been one of our focuses. But the interesting thing with TV is it's a very, very large screen with lots of pixels to render. So there's interesting things that I think we haven't looked at yet. We've started, one of the big things that define UI in TVs is the navigation, and you navigate with the D-pad usually with a remote control instead of a finger. We have done some work in that space, and we have enabled D-pad navigation. I don't think it's perfect yet. Like it's still working that we haven't fully polished Leland, do you have more thoughts on like performance parts?
Yeah, I mean that pretty well covers it. I think when I think of the challenges that come with TV, it's really about D-pad support and then device performance profile. Like you have large screens and typically not so great hardware, and so it's a tough combination. And so definitely, it's something that we want Compose to work for, but there might be, with that particular sort of profile of device, there might be challenges that we're still working out. Let's see, I mean, also the SDK. So like some TVs might have much older SDKs, so you want to make sure. I mean, Compose supports 21 plus, but on some of the older SDKs, we're going to struggle a little bit more in terms of memory management and some graphics performance and things like that. So also watch out for that. You'd want to make sure, so sometimes TVs might not be, so they might not have like the Play Store and things like that. So you want to make sure if you do sort of build something for TVs, that we want to make sure that the app is being ahead of time compiled in a way that will leverage art and not interpret all the code. Basically, Compose ends up pushing your devices to where, for initial runs, a lot more of your app is going to be interpreted if you're not careful. We have mitigation strategies around this that are currently in place, for things, like most phones and stuff, but I'm not sure if that's going to be fully working for TV. So these are all just things to think about and probably test before diving into TV, because we haven't spent as much time sort of optimizing this case yet.
Great. Awesome. Well, that's it for this panel. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you've had a lot of great takeaways from this session. If you've got any more questions, feel free to reach out to everyone on Twitter. I think everyone here is pretty communicative on there, and hopefully we can point you in the right direction. Enjoy the rest of Android Dev Summit 2021.